Assalamu alaikum, brothers and sisters. Welcome back to the Divine Reality course. Obviously, we started on the last session on self-evident truths. Hopefully, you've gotten your head around the concept of self-evident truths itself. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to look at some characteristics of self-evident truths, things that are common amongst all self-evident truths. Right? These are characteristics. These are not principles. These are not hard and fast rules, but they are characteristics that we need to keep in mind. Right? These are characteristics that if a supposed self-evident truth meets these characteristics, then we know this is a self-evident truth. So the first characteristic is that self-evident truths are universal. They are not a product of a specific culture or social condition. They are cross-cultural. Right? You see them in different communities across the world. Number two, self-evident truths are untaught. So they are not based on information transfer, meaning it's not like certain things that we're taught at school. It's not someone has to come and sit with you and teach you a certain concept or an idea for you to know that idea. It's untaught. It's something that naturally develops via the sound human psyche. It's something that naturally comes to one, or one understands just through their own internal processes and reflection and thinking. It's not something that's acquired through external knowledge. Number three, it's natural. Self-evident truths are natural, formed due to the natural functioning of the human psyche. Again, it relates to the second point. Number four, self-evident truths are intuitive. The simplest and most comprehensive interpretation of the world. They're very intuitive and they allow us to make sense of the world that we live in. Now, if we think about some of these self-evident truths that we discussed in the last session, such as, let's take for example, the real world is real. That the world outside, external to us, is real. Let's put it through this filter, if you like, and see if it holds up. So let's look at it. Is the real world being real universal? Meaning, is it something that people have believed cross-culturally throughout history? Not that every single human being without fail has believed in it. You will get people that believe in all sorts of things, but universally, generally speaking, cross-culturally, has it been believed that the real world is real? That the world outside of us that we perceive is real? The answer is yes. Everyone believes this. You don't need to be taught this. And this takes me to the next point, which is that it's untaught. That the real world is real is untaught. You're not going to go to school and your teacher's going to sit you down and have a really serious discussion with you about, today we're going to learn about the fact that the real world is real. We have to believe that the real world is real and we have to establish this or prove this. No, it's untaught. It's something that's assumed. Every sane, rational human being, as we grow and as we mature and as we engage with the world around us, we come to this conclusion intuitively and naturally that the world around us exists. We don't need to prove this and we don't need to be taught this. It's natural. Again, it's formed due to the natural function of the human psyche. Again, when we're engaging with the world and we're growing through the world and we're interacting with the world, it's something that naturally this idea is formed, that the real world, the external world, is actually real. And it's intuitive. It's the simplest and most comprehensive interpretation of the world. It's very, very intuitive, right? Now you see these characteristics overlap and they integrate into each other, but they all help us to further, enhance our understanding of what a self-evident truth actually is. So it's intuitive. It makes sense. It allows us to understand the world. It allows us to build knowledge. It allows us to, learn about things around us. So you can see that the real world being real falls into these four characteristics. Now, let's look at the basic idea of God. Does the basic idea of God fall into these four categories? And remember, this is a basic idea. We're not going into a detailed discussion of Allah's names and attributes here. It's just on a very basic level, the concept of God, a supreme creator, a higher power. Does it fit into these four categories? So let's put them through these four categories. Number one, is the basic idea of God universal? Let's think about this. Throughout history, universally, cross-culturally, have people believed in and acknowledged a higher power? Sure, they may have had their own conceptions of God, different views. They may have worshipped different deities and things and so on and so forth. But the idea, the central core idea of a creator, a higher power, a higher being, that we are to worship even, has that been acknowledged universally and cross-culturally? Absolutely. Even today, majority of the world are comprised of people who believe in God. Majority of the world are not atheists. Okay, throughout history, I mean, there's never been a time in history where you've had the majority of the world not believing in a higher power or some sort of a creator or a cause. It is universal. Let's look at the next characteristic. Is the basic idea of God untaught? Absolutely. And now even there's some supporting evidence that we'll have a quick look at in a second. But it's something that's untaught. It's not something that was taught to people. It's something that naturally develops within people. People are naturally inclined towards believing in a higher power and worshipping a higher power. Is the basic idea of God natural? Again, natural meaning formed by people with normal cognitive and psychological faculties? Again, absolutely yes. This is something sane, rational, intelligent human beings have believed throughout history. Is it intuitive? Absolutely intuitive, right? It helps us, it's simple and it's comprehensive, and it helps us comprehensively explain the world and the universe around us. And I remember earlier I said it's one of the most profound self-evident truths, because look, when you believe in God, when you acknowledge God as self-evident, you don't have to now plug little holes with other self-evident truths. You know, meaning if God exists and you believe in God, that makes sense of the uniformity of the world. That makes sense of morality. You know, that makes sense of the ultimate meaning of life. It helps us understand and explain so many different aspects of reality and life. It comprehensively does this. Even just the basic idea of God. Having a basic idea of a creator, a higher power, allows us to understand why we are moral and why we should be moral, why there's an ought that presses down on us to be moral. It helps us and allows us to understand why the universe exists. It helps us and allows us to understand why the universe is ordered, why it's uniform. It helps us and allows us to understand why intelligent life exists in this world. You know, it helps us and allows us to comprehend and understand the ultimate meaning of life, and so on and so forth, right? So the concept, the idea of God being self-evident, it helps, it's comprehensive, it's intuitive, and it helps us understand reality and life. Now, I mentioned that there are some supporting evidence. Many psychologists, child psychologists have been researching children, on this topic, and they've made some startling conclusions. And this is supporting. We don't need to use this, but it's interesting and it's supporting. Kellerman D, 2004, he states, finally, evidence from 6 to 10-year-olds suggests that children's assignments of purpose to nature relate to the ideas concerning intentional non-human causation. Together, these research findings suggest that children's explanatory approach may be accurately described as intuitive theism. Justin O'Barrett is another individual that you guys can go and look into and read his work. I believe he has a book called Born Believers, where he also highlights and comes to the same conclusion that children naturally and rapidly develop this concept of a higher power, of causation. Olivera Petrovich, she's an atheist, I believe. She also has a book called, I think it's called Natural Theology. Again, she comes to the same conclusion. However, obviously how they explain these conclusions may differ from us as Muslims. They may put it down to evolution, etc. But that's not the point. The point is, what is the data showing? It's showing that the belief in God is something natural, it's something intuitive, and it's something that's formed very early on in our childhood. And this is significant. This is very important to consider. Now, brothers and sisters, what we're going to do in the next section is we're going to make sense of the fitrah. How does the fitrah make sense and tie in with this idea of self-evident truths? So again, just a bit of homework, something for us to do until you move on to the next section, is to really try to come to grips with the idea of self-evident truths, basic beliefs, assumptions which don't require any proof and evidence, and try to really understand, as we've covered already, understand why they don't require any proofs and how fundamental and significant these self-evident truths are for us to function as human beings and function in this world and to acquire knowledge. And also keep in mind and remember that it's not only Islam that has self-evident truths. Like we've mentioned, many other disciplines, many other routes to knowledge, many other, such science itself requires axioms and assumptions, self-evident truths for it to function. And this is an important point because many atheists are followers of science. And many atheists will proudly claim, look, we have science today. We don't need God. We have science today. It allows us to come to truth and understand the world. Sure, you have science today, but also acknowledge and realize that science itself is based on self-evident truths and assumptions that science itself cannot prove, right? So it's something we need to appreciate as human beings. So when you're ready, inshallah, move on to the next section.